Hello, everyone. My name's Grace. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that I still don't want to remember. Of course, it's been a long time, but I still remember the eyes of my classmates when they saw it. Perhaps my story will surprise you a little. Well, I must say, my family isn't quite an ordinary one, and maybe that's because this story happened to me. Okay, first things first. Make sure you watch this video to the end. My mom and dad met when they were in high school. Well, they went to school together, and one day they just started dating. Everyone said they were a sweet couple. After school, my mom went to study at a local college. She wanted to become a pastry chef. However, my dad chose a very surprising option. He wanted to become a teacher in a Catholic school, and he didn't want to teach some ordinary subjects like history or geography. He wanted to teach kids the law of God. As my grandma later told me, my dad once had a dream where a voice said to him this was his life mission. My mom was also quite surprised by my dad's decision, but they loved each other and stayed together. When they both graduated from college, they got married right away, and then they had me. They looked like a perfect family from the outside. They met at school, had a long-term relationship, got married, and had a beautiful daughter. Mom and Dad were very happy. I grew up surrounded by their love. I still remember how we all went to the park together for picnics on Saturdays when my dad finished work. But all this changed when I was 5. By that time, my mom was already known as the best pastry chef in our small town. Once, a VIP customer ordered a cake for his birthday party from her, and it was a great honor for her to make it. Besides, he promised her an excellent reward. The only problem was that this huge cake wouldn't survive after transportation. So my mom had to prepare it right at the customer's home. Of course, my mom agreed. She lived for almost a week in a posh mansion, located in a beautiful suburban area. I don't know exactly what happened out there, but my mom never came home. Well, to be exact, she returned only once, and only to pack her things and leave. I tried to get the details from my dad, but he just explained to me with a sad smile that my mom had found another family and she wouldn't live with us anymore. Later on, when I grew up, I found out the details from my mom's friend. As it turned out, she was my mom's best friend. My mom met the owner's brother in that rich mansion, and they fell in love with each other right away. He suggested she move away to the capital with him and start a new life there, and my mom agreed. She left both her husband and daughter and her favorite job. My dad was totally surprised when she told him about it. He thought she was always happy with him. He planned to have a second kid with her, a son or maybe a second daughter, and live even happier together. Apparently, this was only in his dreams. My mom left. She changed her phone number, and she burned all the bridges from her past life forever. Dad and I were alone. Of course, at first, I cried all the time. I called my mom. I asked her to take me with her, but over time, it passed. I accepted that my family now is just me and Dad, and we don't need anyone else. My dad raised me to be a strict and reserved girl. I can say I was a Christian role model of obedience, humility, and hard work. I studied diligently. I sang in the church choir. And after school, I often helped my dad when he was busy with charity work. My classmates were constantly bragging with their new gadgets and toys. In contrast, I had a simple smartphone, and I read books in all my spare time. During breaks, my classmates discussed the news on the internet, their favorite bloggers, new series, or viral videos. But I couldn't keep up the conversation. I used the internet strictly 2 hours a day, and that was only to find information I needed for my studies. My dad had been saying ever since I was a little girl that there was too much cruelty, violence, and vulgarity on the internet. So he always personally checked which websites I visited and my Google search queries. Now, I understand that despite I read a lot and I studied well, my knowledge was even more limited than that of my classmates in many ways. And this was also one of the reasons why I want to tell you today about my situation. I was 14 then. For as long as I can remember, I've always been a very thin girl. No matter how much I ate, it didn't affect my figure. Perhaps that's why I often got sick and caught a cold. Dad didn't like to treat me with pills. He believed any medicine is just a chemistry that causes more harm instead of doing any good to the body. So, even when I had a cold, I just drank some herbal tea with honey. I ate more fruit and jam. Anyway, my dad treated me with folk medicine. One morning, I woke up to make breakfast for my dad as usual and then go to school. I usually went to bed early, so I got up in the morning fresh and well rested. But that day, I barely got myself out of bed. My whole body ached as if I had a fever, and I felt lethargic. Thinking that it was just another cold, I didn't bother my dad and didn't tell him about my condition. I drank some herbal concoction that was supposed to relieve cold symptoms. Then I went to school. Usually, I felt better after an hour or two, but this time, my temperature didn't go down, and I felt exhausted. In addition, my stomach started aching a lot. I started remembering everything I had eaten yesterday, because the symptoms were very similar to food poisoning, but I couldn't find any cause. Besides, I didn't feel sick, and the pain in my stomach was still a little different. It was very twisting. Even breathing was painful for me. I knew that going to the school nurse wasn't a good option. She'd probably just give me another pill, and then I'll get a reprimand from my dad. So I just had to endure it while carefully listening to the teacher. But she already noticed something was wrong with me. That day, the last lesson was PE. I didn't even imagine how I would be able to do anything in class in such a physical state. I changed into sportswear, but I couldn't even get up from the bench in the locker room because my stomach painfully cramped. As bad luck would have it, that day the teacher planned to hit the qualifying sports standard, and it meant it was impossible to take sick leave. Besides, he'd probably send me to the school nurse. Again, I didn't want that. So, after gritting my teeth, I somehow made my way to the stadium. Even though I felt like I was going to faint at any second, I was sure I would definitely not pass the standards that day. I could barely walk, let alone run. Some of my classmates even approached me and asked what was wrong with me because I didn't look good all day long. I thanked them for their concern, but explained that I just had the flu and that it would definitely go away tomorrow. I wish it was a flu, in fact. When we were all at the start, I was waiting for my turn to run. Suddenly, I felt something wet between my legs. This has never happened to me before, and I had no idea what it could be. I kept delaying the moment when it was my turn to run, so I was the last one with two other girls. I don't know where I found the strength in me, but I still started running. I even made my way to the finish line. I was standing there, trying to get my breathing back to normal. That moment, I already felt my legs getting more and more wet. Suddenly, I heard one of my classmates screaming, "Look, she's bleeding!" It took me a moment to understand what she was saying about me, but when the girls next to me gasped and pointed at my pants, I looked down and noticed a huge blood stain. To say I was afraid is an understatement. I was just speechless, and I didn't know what to do. Call a doctor? Run home? Ask someone for help? Or what? The boys tactfully turned their heads away, and the teacher ran off to get the school doctor, and the girls' faces were still a little confused. Only one of them, Kate, laughed out loud, calling us all alarmists, and saying that nothing terrible had happened. It's just, "Looks like our Drabby is finally grown up." I knew sometimes they called me that behind my back because of my lifestyle, but now I was more interested not in my offensive nickname, but in Kate's reaction. So she knew what exactly was wrong with me, right? I asked her, almost crying, to explain what was happening to me, but she laughed even louder and suggested I Google it myself. "Normally, mothers tell these things to girls. Oops, sorry, I forgot. You don't have one. Ha ha ha," she said sarcastically, and I rushed to the girls' locker room afterwards. I quickly changed my bloody sportswear and rushed home. I could feel the hot liquid running between my legs. I continued to bleed even when I was in the shower. I felt dirty, and I was also so terribly embarrassed in front of all of my classmates who saw me in such a state. So, when I got home, the first thing I did was rush to the bathroom. My school uniform was bloody too, and I had no idea how to stop it. I put my clothes in the washing machine and went to the shower. The amount of blood on my clothes scared me. How in the world can a person lose so much blood and still be conscious? I don't know how much time I spent in the shower. I only came to my senses when my dad knocked on the door and asked me if I was all right, because he had already come home from work and he was waiting for me to cook him dinner. I somehow washed up and cleaned myself up. I took a clean towel, rolled it up, and put it in my bikini zone so that I wouldn't get these clothes dirty too. Of course, it wasn't convenient, but it helped a little to stop the bleeding. I told my dad I was just a little sick. I quickly cooked him dinner and went to my room. I remembered the words of my classmate and her answer to my question what was wrong with me. She said I could easily Google it. So when I was alone, I immediately turned on the computer and started. I knew that my dad might see my searches later. I was afraid something bad might happen to me, so I tried to use indirect searches. I don't remember exactly what I entered in the search bar, but the first result made me cry. Of course, I understood there was nothing good in such strong bleeding, but I didn't think this was a sign of a deadly disease. How could it be? I'm only 14. Why did this happen to me? How would my dad live without me? All these scary questions rolled in my head. I cried my eyes out, not knowing what to do. I was really confused. Maybe I should go to the hospital. But of course, the treatment of such a disease would cost a lot of money, and my family doesn't have that amount. Besides, knowing my dad, he would definitely be against any medical treatment. And finally, what's the point if I'm going to die anyway? I couldn't sleep a wink all night. In the end, I decided I would pretend I went to school, and then I would just wander around somewhere for half a day. First, because I was ashamed to look my classmates in the eye, and second, the bleeding didn't stop. So I just changed one towel after another, throwing the dirty ones in the trash. I hoped I would feel better the next day, but my condition hadn't changed. All the same fatigue, lethargy, temperature. I barely had the strength to make breakfast for my dad and pretend everything was fine so he wouldn't worry. And then I left the house. I got on the first bus that came along and went to the final destination. I remember that just recently I was here with my father, and there was a park nearby where we arranged a charity concert. I reached the park, sat down on a bench, and started crying. By the end of the day, he would find out I skipped school, because the teacher would probably call him, and my dad would want to know the reason for skipping. And what would I tell him? I'm sorry, Dad, I'm dying, but I didn't know how to tell you. Something like this? Or what? This is ridiculous. Apparently, I fell asleep right on the bench, probably because I didn't sleep all night long. I woke up because someone was insistently shaking my shoulder. When I opened my eyes, I saw a woman. Her face was troubled. She asked me if I was all right and if I needed any help. I couldn't say anything to her, and when I got up to leave the park, I found there was a bloody trace on the bench. The woman also saw it. She gasped loudly and immediately grabbed my arm, telling me I still needed help. Anyway, I don't know why I trusted her. I probably saw in her eyes some compassion, but I told her everything as it was, about my condition, about the bleeding, and about the fact I didn't know how to return home. The woman listened carefully and then asked me how old I was and if I'd ever heard anything about having a period. I didn't lie and say I didn't know what she was talking about. She was very surprised and then patiently started explaining everything to me. This was just the girl's sexual system functioning. When the body believes it's ready for sex and pregnancy, some changes occur and then menstruation starts. This happens once a month with every woman, and this was the indicator that showed I wasn't sick, but quite the opposite. I was totally healthy and my body's clockwork. The woman immediately took me to the pharmacy, where she showed me what hygiene items are needed these days. It turned out there are some tools that are much more effective than towels. She was very surprised that my mom didn't tell me about such things, but I immediately answered I lived with my dad, who was unable to have such conversations with me. That woman, Mrs. White, sincerely sympathized with me and gave me her phone number, in case anything bad happened again. She said I could always contact her and ask some questions about my health or the female body functioning. I immediately went home, took a shower, and decided I would talk to my dad tonight and tell him everything as it was. I breathed a sigh of relief that I wasn't terminally ill, and somehow I could manage with one epic fail day at school. The only thing that bothered me was how to go back to school and look my classmates in the eye. I was so disgraced, and I showed my ignorance. I didn't know some trivial and everyday things, but it turned out I was wrong to worry. On my return, everyone tactfully pretended nothing had happened, and they never remembered about that incident later. My dad and I agreed we would always talk to each other about everything, even if the topic would be awkward or delicate. Tell me, do you have any embarrassing and awkward topics you just can't discuss with your parents? How are you trying to discuss them with your mom and dad? Write your answers in the comments. Click the like button if you've enjoyed my story. Subscribe to the channel to stay tuned and never miss new stories. Bye-bye, guys. See you around.